This video is sponsored by MPB. We tend to create this false dichotomy when it comes to the way that we think about human beings. You'll hear lots of people say something like, there are only two kinds of people in the world: those who make their decisions emotionally and those who make their decisions rationally. Many personality tests, like the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, for example, don't really help the problem either, because they, broadly speaking, split the world into either thinking or feeling types, which just reinforces this dualistic notion. But I think we make a big mistake when we put ourselves squarely in one box or the other. The truth we already know is that we're all a mix of thinking and feeling, but I think the trick is to find balance between the two. And artists especially have to ride a very interesting line between their intellect and their emotions in order to make things. Too much thinking-based work could see us playing it too safe and losing the substance and depth in what we're trying to say. But on the other side, too much feeling-based work could see us being inconsistent and quite self-indulgent and just creating a confusing mess. All human beings think and we all feel, but I think if we want to be better integrated individuals and better rounded artists, then the trick is to work out which side we operate in more intuitively and then spend some more energy on the other side where we're weaker to build ourselves up there and balance ourselves out. So let's start by talking about the thinking or the more rational side of things. And this is actually the part that I'm good at. My personality type definitely leans more towards that rational side, and it helps me in a number of ways. Firstly, it makes me more consistent and disciplined with the things that I make. And I know that those are two words that creatives don't like to attach to their process often, but I've never bought the lie that building in more structure into the things that you make robs it of any life or depth. I think that a rational approach to when and how we make can only help. For example, I think it's our rational side that really helps us with our motivation. We all know that if we only made things when we felt like it, we would all make half as often. And personally, I think it's a mistake to hitch our motivation to the wild horses of our ever-changing emotions. I think we should seat our motivation in our rational side, where it's a decision and a choice to make. I also think that we make a mistake when we say things like, I don't feel inspired, because personally, I don't think inspiration is actually a feeling. You've heard me use that quote on this channel before that says, inspiration finds you working. That means that you have to begin doing the thing that you do sometimes in order for inspiration to strike, which means it had to begin with the choice to start making, even on days when you didn't feel like it. I don't need to tell you that you've made some of your best images on days when you weren't feeling it, on days when you were sitting on the couch and struggling to drum up the feeling for wanting to go out and take images, but you forced yourself to get up, to override those feelings that wanted you to just stay at home, to pick up the camera, force yourself out the door and go and make those images. And think about it, those images wouldn't even exist today if you hadn't made a rational choice against the feeling. It's our rational minds that will also help us to come up with a plan to keep developing ourselves as we go forward, to build our own curriculum of learning, whether it's attending the right courses or reading the right books or watching the right YouTube videos, if that's how you taught yourself like I did, but to build the right skill set to make the kind of work that we want to make. If you're learning photography skills, for example, it's your rational mind that's going to help you to identify the roadblocks that you're hitting, to then formulate the right sorts of questions so you can go seeking the right sorts of answers. And as you do, as you build those skills that answer those questions, you're creating a whole toolbox for yourself of skills that you can pull out on those days when inspiration does strike. It's also our rational minds that will help us to come up with the direction for our work beyond the visuals, that will help us to give ourselves projects and work on themes and to make sure that we're putting the message into our work that we really intend. If we only feel these things out, we're likely to make quite a confusing mess. But if we pull in our rational mind and use it to help to direct us and keep us on track with our targets and goals and how we want to make things and what we want those things to say, I think will make better balanced work. So what about the feeling side? Well, I thought instead of making a bunch of rational points about feelings, instead I'd read you a little story from The Meaning in the Making and hope that you can feel or experience what I'm talking about. Of all the jobs I've done in my adult life, there is one that I have found especially fulfilling. When I was studying at the seminary, I needed to get extra work to pay the rent, so I picked up a part-time job as an aftercare teacher. When my lectures finished for the day, I would race across to the local primary school just as they were letting out from their classes. And it was then my job to sit and do homework with the children for the afternoon until their parents could pick them up. I had a deal with my class of 30 or so that once they had all completed their homework, I would take them out to the sports field for some games. One day it might be cricket, the next maybe soccer, and on hot days things had a habit of just descending into a water fight. The teachers among you will know that there are always some children who stand out to you as needing a little more attention and help, and those are the ones who quickly worm their way into your heart. In my case, there was one boy of about 10 years old in my class who was going through a particularly rough time at home. His parents were getting a divorce, and they seemed to be asking him to make the decision about whom he wanted to live with, which was tearing him apart. It seemed to me inordinately unfair to put such a hefty decision on such a young mind. It was often the case that whilst the other kids were running around the sports field in the late afternoon sun, I would take a break and sit on the grassy bank, and this young man would come and sit beside me. Some days he wanted to talk and tell me what was going on. Some days we spoke about movies or computer games because it seemed he just wanted a distraction. Some days I offered him what little comfort I could. Some days we just watched the other kids running around and enjoyed the sight of the setting sun. I felt powerless to help him, but happy to be there for him in whatever ways he needed. One day he met me at the gates of the school, and as I walked up, he handed me a painting. In it, 2 stick figures stood in a field of green, the sky afire with the colors of an improbably vivid sunset. He briefly and bashfully explained that in class that day, they had been given the task of making a painting around the theme of friendship. He told me he had decided to paint the 2 of us talking beside the sports field, as we often did in the afternoons. I'll be honest, the painting was a technical horror show. No detail in the huge sweeping brushstrokes, no perspective control with the stick figures appearing pretty much the same size as the trees, bits of white paper showing through where he'd missed spots, and colours running into other colours where he hadn't. Even the paper was heavily wrinkled from being oversaturated by watercolour paints and then allowed to dry too fast. However, I've had the privilege of standing in front of original works by Vermeer, Rembrandt, Van Gogh and Rubens, and none have come close to moving me the way that painting did. This artistic train wreck would win no awards, but it was one of the most beautiful things I had ever seen. This young man had never said thank you out loud for the time we'd spent talking or for my support, and I would never have expected him to. But this piece he had made screamed how much that time had meant to him. It conveyed his feelings beyond words, and it moved me deeply in return. That painting lived on my fridge door at home for many years until it was regrettably lost in a move. As art goes, it was one of the most affecting pieces I have ever laid eyes on. The things we make have the power to convey emotion. They can communicate what we feel to others, and in turn we can elicit feelings in the people who experience the things we've made. Getting a handle on this potential and using it more deliberately may help us make more meaningful things. And learning the balance between using our emotions as a guide and not being self-indulgent with them can help us better formulate what we want to communicate in our work. This is my weaker side, and I know it. It's the part of myself that I really need to work on, digging all the time for better self-awareness, more emotional intelligence, to acknowledge what I'm feeling, to understand where it comes from and what it's really telling me so that I can weave it more intentionally into the things that I make. Because I really believe that art is at its best when it's delivered from one heart to another. I hope that while you've been listening to this video, you've been able to acknowledge to yourself which side, the thinking or the feeling, you gravitate towards more naturally. Because now it's time to go to work on the other side, on the weaker side, on the less comfortable side, to build yourself up there and make yourself a better balanced, more integrated artist. Personally, I know that I can lean too much on that rational and that thinking side because I'm stronger over here, so it's more comfortable, it's easier. And I need to remind myself to always be stepping over and building myself up in that uncomfortable space where I'm weaker, to dig deep, to feel things more openly, to put those emotions into the things that I make on purpose, to make sure that I'm not just coldly conceptualizing my creative output. But maybe you find yourself on the other end of things where you're very comfortable with that emotional side, but you're also worried because your work isn't very consistent, and perhaps you're worried about how it's translating to other people and you have suspicions that you're getting a bit too self-indulgent. Then it's time to step over to the uncomfortable side, to bring in more of that rational thinking side, and to give yourself targets and a strategy and to work out what meaning and message you really want in the things that you make. At the end of the day, I think we need both the thinking and the feeling working together in the things that we make. And I don't think it's good enough to just say, well, I'm one or the other. I think the trick is, if we want to be well-rounded, well-integrated artists, to work out where we're weaker and put in some time. Good luck. Thanks again to MPB for sponsoring this episode. They're a great platform online for buying and selling used camera gear. MPB will appeal to two groups of photographers in particular, and the first are those photographers like myself who buy used camera gear often because they want to build up their kit and save a bit of money. MPB will offer you fair prices based on the condition of the equipment that you're buying and will give you a 6-month warranty for peace of mind. And the second group are those photographers who find that their cupboard shelves and their camera bags are just filling up with equipment that they don't really get much use out of anymore. MPB will buy that gear off you. And I like the idea that it then gets loaded onto their platform where another up-and-coming photographer might be able to get that gear in their hands and make great work with it. Getting a quote for your camera body or lens with MPB couldn't be simpler, and if you accept their quote, they will just give you a label to print out, you can box the item up, and they will even send a courier to your door with a 1-hour slot to save you a trip to the post office. So whether you're a photographer or a filmmaker looking to buy a used camera body or lens to build up your gear, or you're a photographer who just finds you're collecting too much gear that you know you don't get much use out of and you need to sell on, MPB are a fantastic option. I will leave a link to them down in the description. Go along and check them out.